All right, Jordan, I am on eScribe and YouTube, so you are ready to roll whenever ready.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll wait until 2:10, just to give everyone a few minutes from the previous meeting. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. We continue to meet virtually via Zoom, and instructions to join the live meeting are available at ci.missoula.mt.us/webcasts. There you'll find the meeting agenda and links to join the live meeting. Our first item of business is roll call. Amanda, can you call the roll for us, please?
Yes. Anderson? Absent. Becerra? Absent. Carlino?
Here.
Contos? Absent. Hess?
Present.
Jones? Absent. Jordan?
Present.
Nugent?
Present.
Savage?
Present.
Cheryl,
Present.
Vasika,
Present.
and West. Absent. All right, it does appear you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And I expect we'll have a few more members filtering in a few minutes here. So our first item of business is approval of the minutes from January 12th. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, those will be approved. Is there any public comment on items that are not on our agenda? All right, seeing none, we just have one agenda item today, and this is presentation of some research that's been conducted by the community planning, development, and innovation staff over the past several months on creating specific standards in our Title V business licensing code with regard to cannabis business standards. And this work is a follow-up to the zoning work that was done in late 2021 and is specific to primarily to energy consumption with a few other moving parts in there as well. So we have a fantastic white paper attached to the agenda, and we have quite a bit of time today just to have a conversation about the content of that white paper and to help direct staff in terms of what direction we want to move forward as far as these potential Title V amendments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cassie. Are you introducing this, or?
I'll be presenting with Madsen and Spencer, but Madsen's going to start us off.
Okay, great. Well, Madsen, I'll turn it over to you and take it away. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. And thank you everyone else who is here. It's nice to see some new faces. So first, I want to introduce everyone presenting today from the planning and land use team, starting with Spencer Stark, an associate planner, Cassie Trepard, a planning supervisor, and I am Madsen Matthias, an assistant planner. CPDI staff have prepared a white paper detailing our recommendations for updating Title V, the Business Licenses and Regulations Ordinance, to include energy conservation requirements for cannabis cultivation. At today's meeting, we would like feedback from City Council on the recommendations outlined in the white paper as we prepare to draft the ordinance language. Okay, so in August of 2021, the city began the public process for updating the Title 20 zoning code in response to the state legalization of recreational cannabis. On November 2nd, 2021, staff presented the recommended zoning code changes to Planning Board, and Planning Board expressed concern over the high energy usage associated with cannabis cultivation. At this meeting, Planning Board made a recommendation to City Council to include a requirement that lighting power density for indoor cannabis cultivation facilities be a maximum of 36 watts per square foot. Planning Board recommended placing this requirement in zoning code alongside staff's recommended regulatory revisions. On November 29th, City Council voted to approve the staff's recommended zoning code amendments and then directed staff to amend Title V to incorporate revisions regarding energy consumption for cannabis cultivators.
As we were conducting research, I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. One moment. Okay.
Work, you can hear us?
I will likely have to hop off and back on, so I'll be back.
Short pause.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Sorry, I just started speaking and then obnoxious noise emanating from my headset. Okay, so as we were looking over the information on cannabis cultivation and energy use, it became apparent that cannabis is distinct among other business types related to its energy consumption. Boulder, Colorado, which tracks energy consumption by business type, has reported that cannabis cultivation uses seven times more energy per square foot than the average commercial use. In addition, Denver has attributed 45% of its load growth, which is the increase in energy demands within their municipal bounds, as being attributed to cannabis cultivation. This is a common theme that we've seen across our research when examining Western states that have legalized cannabis within the last few years. You see a dramatic or significant notable increase in energy consumption as a result of cannabis cultivation. In addition, this can pose some obstacles for cities that may have insufficient infrastructure to meet those new demands. In 2019, Portland, Oregon experienced blackouts as a result that have been attributed to cannabis cultivation and the increase in load demands. Compare this to Missoula's existing energy consumption, especially its position as the second highest consuming county within Montana, and there is a impetus to examine the impacts that cannabis cultivation may have on our community. The two big takeaways that we were able to land on as part of our research is that cannabis cultivation is a highly energy intensive use compared to other uses. And then other jurisdictions that have seen legalized cannabis cultivation within their communities have seen an overall increase in energy demand. Energy use within cannabis cultivations can be broken down generally as demonstrated on your screen with this pie chart demonstrating that lighting accounts for 38% on average for energy consumption, and climate control, this being ventilation, cooling, and other climate control metrics, accounting for 51% of the energy consumption. At first glance, it would look like ventilation and cooling may be the optimum place to try and shore up energy demands. But when we factor in the impacts on lighting, on the heating and cooling of the cultivation areas, lighting becomes much more attractive as an option to mitigate those sorts of impacts. This is because inefficient light bulbs generate a significant amount of heat within the enclosed areas that they are located, leading to a need to cool and ventilate the area in order to maintain a healthy crop. When LED lights or other efficient light bulbs are utilized in a space, less heat energy, less heat is given off, and therefore the need to cool as aggressively is greatly reduced. In addition, lighting, LED lights in particular, are increasing in prevalence and use within the industry. There has been a shift in the last 5 years, showing that cultivators are choosing LEDs and updating old systems to integrate LEDs within those systems. LEDs have hit a sweet spot for a return on investment, where they are now cheaper and more effective and have a shorter payback period overall. So again, from this research, we've come away with 4 big ideas. The first is that LEDs are becoming more prevalent for cannabis cultivation as they become more effective and more available for cultivators. Second is that LED lights are more efficient than traditional lighting technology, such as HID lights, which are high intensity discharge lights. And switching to more efficient lighting is the most available and effective way to reduce energy consumption for cannabis cultivation. And finally, the LED costs are at a point where the upfront cost is still high, but the payback period, because of the energy savings, correlates to a relatively short return on investment.
There are different metrics for cultivation lighting requirements being used by other jurisdictions. Planning Board's original recommendation was to limit lighting power density to 36 watts per square foot. Lighting power density limits the amount of energy used in a particular area. In other states, this requirement often applies to the cannabis plant canopy area. Lighting power density is traditionally used in building code, which means it's a metric many regulators are familiar with. However, states that have used lighting power density are finding that it is difficult to enforce due to confusion over how to measure canopy area. This metric relies heavily on self-reporting from cultivators, accurate calculations, and accurate measurements by inspectors. Several states are choosing to regulate using a metric called Photosynthetic Photon Efficacy. Moving forward, we'll refer to it as PPE. PPE describes how effective a light bulb or fixture is at converting electricity into the spectral range that drives photosynthesis in plants. A high PPE means less energy is being used to produce the type of light needed to grow plants. Because this metric is tied specifically to plant growth, it is used in horticulture. PPE is measured in micromoles per joule. Grow light manufacturers commonly include the PPE in the lighting specifications or will provide it upon request. This metric is easier to enforce because inspectors can check to see each fixture matches the manufacturer information provided with the business license application. This number relates to the lighting itself, so measurements and calculations aren't necessary like they would be with lighting power density. Sorry. And as Spencer noted, LED lights use the least amount of energy. This means they have the highest PPE, generally ranging from 1.9 to 3.7 micromoles per joule. There are two types of HID light, which are those more traditional lights. They are high pressure sodium or HPS and metal halide. Some metal halide and double-ended HPS lights have an efficacy equal to LED lights. However, most HID lights do not exceed 1.7 micromoles per joule. Fluorescent lights, which are preferred by some growers for early stages of plant growth, have the lowest PPE. Design Lights Consortium is a third-party organization that maintains a list of high-efficiency grow lighting. This list is called the Horticulture Lighting Qualified Products List. In order for lighting to be added to this list, it must have a PPE of 1.9 micromoles per joule or greater. So it is a good resource for those looking to find higher or more effective lighting. So in summary, different jurisdictions are using lighting power density or photosynthetic photon efficacy metrics to regulate energy usage at cultivation operations. Some jurisdictions use both, giving cultivators the choice to comply with one of the options. Several jurisdictions provide the option for cultivators to choose lights off of the Design Lights Consortium list as well.
So staff researched other jurisdictions adopting similar regulations. For the most part, these regulations are occurring at the state level, seen in California, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Illinois. In Colorado, both the city of Denver and county of Boulder adopted regulations to conserve energy at cannabis cultivation facilities. These regulations are generally placed in building codes, energy codes, and state cannabis codes. Regulations vary, but most include multiple options for complying with the regulatory requirements, including lighting power density maximums, like that 36 watts per square foot, PPE minimums, like what Cassie was saying with the 1.9 moles per joule, or selecting lighting types from that Design Lights Consortium list. Some jurisdictions have chosen to exempt smaller operations from these regulations and have allowed for lower PPE thresholds for greenhouses. Next. Outdoor odor complaints related to cannabis cultivation have been reported in Missoula and frequently occur in other places that have legalized recreational cannabis. This is a nuisance recognized by staff. Furthermore, staff found that cannabis plants emit volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which compromise indoor air quality for workers and are an additional hazard to this subset of the public. Proper installation and maintenance of filtration systems is the most effective method for mitigating odor, mold, and these VOCs. Carbon filters are commonly used as one of the more efficient and cost-effective technologies for air filtration. Next. So the city of Missoula has adopted plans and policies regarding energy conservation and climate action. Missoula County, Climate Smart Missoula, and the city of Missoula jointly led a climate resiliency planning process called Climate Ready Missoula. This plan was adopted as part of the Our Missoula 2035 City Growth Policy. This plan includes strategies for incentivizing equitable, energy efficient building practices, advocating for statewide regulatory and program changes, and developing local energy savings programs. The city of Missoula adopted the Climate Smart Action Plan in 2015. This plan includes goals such as green building, energy efficiency and conservation, renewable energy, and sustainable economic development. In 2019, Missoula County Commissioners and Missoula City Council adopted a joint resolution establishing a goal of 100% clean electricity for the Missoula urban area by 2030. Next. The City of Missoula Strategic Plan references implementation of the Climate Action Plan and the 100% Clean Energy Initiative. This plan also mentions creating incentives for green building practices. The City Growth Policy aims to increase climate awareness and to promote energy conservation and renewable energy in conjunction with new and expanding development. Next. So staff held a stakeholder meeting on January 7th with local business owners. Over 50 local cannabis businesses were sent a survey requesting information about the lighting types and filtration they used, and were given space for general feedback. 9 individuals, about 15% of the stakeholders we reached out to, completed the survey. The survey results showed that most respondents are not using 100% LED lights during pre-flowering and the flowering stages of cultivation. Many expressed a desire to maintain flexibility in choosing different types of lighting in addition to LED. A common theme was the desire to have at least a year to come into compliance with the proposed amendments, and there were also concerns that smaller businesses would struggle to survive that payback period for switching to high efficiency lighting. A few businesses mentioned they would be avoiding the regulations entirely by growing in a different county. Many expressed support of a regulation that offers various options for compliance, and additionally, the majority of survey respondents reported using carbon filters.
Okay, so staff recommend reducing energy consumption at cultivation operations by requiring businesses to comply with one of 3 options. 2 of the options relate to choosing efficient lighting. As we discussed earlier, lighting accounts for over 1/3 of energy consumed by the average cannabis business and exacerbates cooling needs. Regulating lighting is the approach used by most other jurisdictions with similar regulations. The first option would be to use lighting in the cultivation area that has a minimum PPE of 1.9 micromoles per joule. This threshold would allow LED lights and some high efficacy HID lights. California and Vermont are currently in the process of adopting regulations with the same 1.9 micromoles per joule requirement. This is also the number used by the Design Lights Consortium list as a requirement of a light being listed on their list. Staff chose using PPE over lighting power density because it is easier to enforce and implement effectively. Additionally, much more research was available for where to set the PPE requirement than was available for where to set a lighting power density requirement. The second option allows cultivators to choose lights from the Design Lights Consortium list. Lighting on this list technically also meets option 1. However, it points businesses toward a pre-approved list of lighting. The last option would be to produce renewable energy on site. Some cultivators may still want to use less efficient lighting to produce certain strains. This option would offer a path for cultivators to offset their energy usage without having to alter their lighting setup. And though not referenced in the white paper, staff are also planning to incorporate the option to use off-site renewable energy obtained through participation in a community solar program or equivalent. This option is available in the county's current draft, and we would like to follow suit and incorporate it into our recommendation. In addition to the lighting requirements, staff recommend requiring carbon filters be installed and maintained per the manufacturer requirements in all cannabis cultivation operations.
In addition, staff has been advised that local municipalities are limited to incentive-based programs to regulate energy consumption. The recommendations that staff has outlined have been developed to provide cultivators with a suite of options to encourage responsible and reasonable energy use for their businesses. We believe that these recommendations will fit within the parameters of, outlined in MCA or the state code. But to avoid any conflict with state code, we will be in contact with the state when drafting the ordinance to ensure compliance with state law.
So at the bottom of this slide is a link to Engage Missoula, or the Engage Missoula page for this project. This page is the best place to stay up to date on the process and to submit public comment. Any changes to dates will be posted here. Last month, staff held an industry stakeholder meeting, a community stakeholder meeting, and met with the energy and climate team to get feedback on our initial recommendations. Today, we are here at Land Use and Planning Committee to discuss the white paper, set the ordinance direction, and set a public hearing for April 4th. The ordinance will go to LUP on March 30th for a pre-public hearing info item and City Council for the public hearing on April 4th. Final consideration is planned for April 11th. In the event of changes related to state review, as mentioned by Spencer, staff will revise the schedule to check in at LUP before moving forward. Next. So there is a recommended motion for today's meeting. So today's staff recommend that City Council direct community planning, development, and innovation staff to prepare an ordinance amending Title V, the City of Missoula's business licenses and regulations ordinance, in alignment with the presented Title V amendments, cannabis business standards white paper, and set public hearing process with an April 4th, 2022 public hearing at City Council. One more slide. So staff would like feedback from City Council on the proposal as a whole. However, there are a few specific items staff would like City Council to consider for the ordinance. Stakeholder feedback and some of the literature expressed concerns about how this type of regulation could disproportionately affect small local cultivation businesses. Smaller local businesses may be less likely to have capital available to upgrade lighting. And though the payback period is relatively short, the upfront costs can be quite high. However, exempting small cultivation operations could create a cumulative effect, reducing the overall effectiveness of this ordinance at conserving energy. Using efficient lighting results in savings over time, giving cultivators a competitive edge in the long run. Staff would like to know if City Council are interested in exempting certain cultivation operations from lighting requirements. This is not part of our current recommendation, but could be incorporated. A middle of the road option could also be to allow existing small cultivation operations to come into compliance over a longer period of time. Second, considering greenhouses can make use of natural sunlight, California and Vermont are proposing regulations that allow greenhouses to have a lower PPE minimum of 1.7 micromoles per joule, as opposed to that 1.9 for indoor operations. City council interested in setting a lower threshold for greenhouses, or should we continue to hold them to the same standard as indoor operations? At this time, staff are not recommending changes to Title 20 zoning code as a result of this Title 5 amendment. We had heard interest in this from some businesses. We believe the Title 5 recommendations do not mitigate the full range of impacts studied when cultivation was classified by size in Title 20. Many of these impacts related to urban form. And lastly, while carbon filters appear to be very effective, other systems could be ideal depending on the intent of this regulation. Some filters are better at reducing outdoor odor, while other filters are really great at improving indoor air quality. Is it City Council's goal to include a filtration requirement? And if so, would City Council prefer we focus on one intent being indoor safety versus the other of odor? And this concludes our presentation. Spencer Madsen and I are available for questions. Lee Ratterman, our climate action specialist, is also here with us for the discussion period. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. So I think we can have we have quite a bit of time, so we can have a kind of far-ranging discussion. We also have some members of the public who may wish to comment, so we'll break for public comment at sometime early on, as well as probably at the end of the meeting. So I do have a few people lining up. So why don't we just start with a general discussion, and then if it feels like we need to drill down into these more topical areas, we can do that in a more structured way. But let's just start with whatever's on your mind. And we've got Amber first, and then Gwen.
Thanks. And first of all, I thought the white paper was impressive, so thank you. And I really appreciate the level of work in detail. And I had to read it a couple of times and still, I'm sure, missed some of the detail in it as I was trying to understand all of it. So I have a few different questions, if that's okay, Jordan. My first one is, I guess, around if you identified, and maybe I missed this in the white paper, any business loan programs for like the lighting and the heating, or, I mean, are there any programs out there for that? I guess that's my first question.
So I'm not aware of any of these types of programs. Lee, I know there is a rebate option through Northwestern Energy. Lee, can you speak to that? And if you know if there are other funding programs available?
Yeah, so Northwestern Energy does provide a small rebate program for LED lighting, switchovers, and energy efficiency. Unfortunately, there isn't any federal funding available since marijuana and cannabis cultivation is still illegal on the federal level. So not a ton of options in terms of rebates and that sort of thing, but there is a lot of data to show that switching over to LEDs has a really quick and effective payback period. So the energy savings is significant. And so the cost savings on the utility side will pay off quickly.
Okay, thanks. Do you mind if I ask my other questions, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead, Amber.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to make a comment before I go to my next question on that. I with the smaller business, and I don't know where we draw the line of what is smaller and what's not smaller, but one of the ideas I wrote down before, I think Cassie said it, was the idea of giving them a longer time to reach the goal of, or reach the metric of lighting and energy use, possibly. I'd like to hear what my fellow counselors think about that, but that was something that I was thinking around that as well, because the output of money is going to be harder for them in the short run. And even though they're going to get it back, they still have to have the money to do it. So they could do that a little more slowly. I'm wondering, I have so many notes here. Okay, so with the option, if we gave them the pick one of the three options, which I also had notes after reading your white paper that I liked that. But one of the questions I have around it is the enforceability and how complex enforcement becomes if they're just picking from a list. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, So they would indicate to us how they are meeting it and show evidence that they are meeting it at the time of application. When you get to inspections, if they're choosing the Design Lights Consortium list option or the 1.9 micromoles per joule, they would give us their lighting manufacturer information. And then once you get to inspection, the inspector could look at the lighting installed, compare it to the manufacturer information we're provided. And if it's the same lighting fixture, then we know it's good to go, versus having to calculate something depending on how they set up their grow operation with like lighting power density. When it comes to renewable energy, I think we're still fleshing out some of the details of that, but it does appear to be fairly easily to enforce and implement.
Great. Okay. And then I guess my last question is around the air quality. Does OSHA have rules for that anyway, as far as if they have workers in that space? I mean, aren't there some federal regulations around that, or I don't really know what those would be. It's just something on my mind. You know, and I realize it's not legal on a federal level, but I would assume some of the rules around air quality would apply to this as well.
I can try and speak to that. The research on the bio-generated volatile organic compounds is pretty nascent, it's in its infancy, so I don't think that federal regulations have caught up to it. But it's something that we noticed that came up a handful of times within our research and was brought to our attention by some members of the public as well. And we followed up with some of the institutions that have produced that research to just understand the breadth and depth of that impact. And it doesn't seem to be of great significance, but it's something that filtration can help to address.
Thanks, and great work, you guys. I appreciate all this.
Thanks, Amber. I've got Gwen next, and then Sandra on deck.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I read the paper twice. I'm not sure that I've still grasped everything in there, but it was super informative. And I did have a couple of questions just as a basic threshold, because it seemed to have so much impact on this entire project. There is still some uncertainty as to how far down this road we can go based on how the state will interpret what we come up with and to what degree it will be either regulatory or incentive based. And if you guys could clarify for me, and we saw the timeline and you're hoping to finalize this in April, at what point do we communicate with the state to see what we really have and get back feedback from them? Is that after we've passed all of this, or is that during this process?
So we're going to take today's feedback and start drafting the ordinance and have a draft ready next week. At that point, we will be reaching out to the state to set up a meeting because they will have that specific language to review rather than the white paper, which is a lot broader.
Okay, great, thanks. So we should have some sense of how strong these regulations will or won't be prior to truly voting on them. So that's helpful. Follow up, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great, thanks. So I also thought, well, I feel like in the last day or so, I saw something coming out of Washington, D.C. that the administration is actually picking up legalizing marijuana. I could be incorrect, but I swear I saw some kind of a news headline, which a lot of these issues that you guys are trying to parse through, it's between state and federal, a bit of a jigsaw puzzle out there trying to make them work. So that's interesting. But on that line, this issue of small businesses, I wanted to pick up where Amber had touched on that. I think that's important to try and, to the degree possible, create an equal footing, because I think we want small businesses to succeed just as much as the big ones. And I know that with banking and loans, business loans, capital, et cetera, that is a steeper hill to climb. So the only thing that popped into my head also that seemed somewhat feasible was having a little bit of a longer time frame for compliance. And I'll just throw it out there to our our counselors who are in the small business world. I was thinking of Sandy and John Contos and Mike Nugent. If you have thoughts on it from the business point of view, I think that would be interesting to share as to what would be feasible and workable to try and get to this goal of having less energy usage. So I'll just throw that out there, but I thought that was, I think it's important that we somehow try and thread that needle, if that is helpful feedback for staff.
Thanks, Gwen. Sandra, and then Daniel.
Thanks. And first of all, thank you to the staff. This was a very detailed presentation. I really appreciate you guys putting the time and effort into that. My thoughts on this, from a business point of view, it is cost efficient to have lower energy usage. So I don't think that the government should, put limitations on that or regulations on it. I know that's probably not going to fly with this council. So if we can't do that, then I would really like having small businesses be exempt from that, and allowing as much time as possible to let businesses get the necessary equipment to comply with these regulations. So I hope that's helpful. My baby's crying, so I'll stop.
Thanks, Sandra. Daniel?
Yeah, I was just at the staff recommendations I just highly recommend that we do regulate the energy efficiency standards as part of it, because using less energy is the best type of renewable energy. For example, like if we saved 10% with solar panels or something on there, that would also require mining for those materials and all the costs that it takes to go into that. So I think that would be good to have renewable energy on site and energy efficiency standards. But I really think if we're trying to save on emissions, we really need to regulate the energy efficiency standards. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. I don't have any other hands up. Does anyone? Stacy, go ahead. Manson, do you want to respond to something that's come up, or do you have something else to?
Yeah, I just had, I guess, two, maybe not qualifiers. One thing was coming back to what Gwen was saying, to consider the small business compliance period. One of the big kind of dates that we as staff, and I think we as a governing body should think about, is that July 1st of 2023, when cannabis opens to the general public. So whatever compliance period we take into account, I think still factoring that in and trying to pass regulations or have people come into compliance before that date, I think that's important for council to consider. And then the second one is kind of putting it back on council to define a small and local business as well, is more like the intricacy too that we're looking for if we are going to grant that type of exemption. Thank you.
Thanks. Stacy?
Okay. Thanks for that. Got my microphone figured out, and that gave Madsen some time to give their thoughts on that, which I appreciate, because I am thinking about the small business aspect. I do think that Mr. Carlino is right in terms of just overall less energy usage helps everyone sort of achieve the goals around climate change, which are incredibly important. And so I want to have everyone sort of have to be compliant with those, because we all need to be doing our part. But however, I am mindful of the limitations on small businesses, especially given the fact that so many small business loans are not available because of this particular industry. So it does seem as though the granting a longer timeline for them to come into compliance does seem like spreading or kind of threading the needle on that. My question is mainly to staff in terms of like, what are our options? And I don't know, you might not be able to answer these right now, but when you were giving this presentation, I think probably everyone has a different definition of small business. And so would be curious to sort of see some options of what does that mean? Footprint, energy usage, number of employees, sales. I mean, there's different metrics which you can, depending on how you want to look at it, you can decipher. Sorry, it's been a long day. And I need to drink another cup of coffee. And then, Mr. Chair, may I have a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, perfect. So then I would like to hear a little bit more. I'm concerned about, you made in your presentation and then highlighted in the white paper, the concern that if we do over-regulate, if that's what people want to call it, that it does push people outside of the county limits or the city limits. Is what we're proposing, is that going to be a countywide, a citywide? How do we interface with that? I understand that we, I think have county commissioners who probably share our aligned values on energy consumption. And so we can only control that far, but, and I could have missed it, and I apologize if you've addressed the kind of county city interface with this.
Yeah, I can speak more to that. Your first part about the metrics, I think that canopy area, since the state organizes the businesses by the tier they can have based on how large the grow area is, would be a good metric. We could go off of employees. I think sales gets a little bit trickier, especially with some of the business models businesses in town have. And then let's see, your second question about the county. The county is working on their own set of regulations, very similar to ours. I think at this point in time, the only real difference between the city and the county regulations is they are still proposing a lighting power density requirement. I don't know where they're at in the process and if they also may change to PPE. We can check in with them, but they are proposing something very similar. So the two should interface well, whether you're in city limits or just outside of them.
All right, thank you. Stacy, do you have another follow-up, or are you done?
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I guess if staff is looking for guidance from us, I would, as Cassie said, the canopy if that's what the state is using, it does seem like that is a good metric for us to use as well in terms of what we define as a small business. And I would definitely love to make sure that our regulations in the county align as seamlessly as possible. So don't know if we need to how to facilitate that. But I think that that's an important request when we look going forward about what we finally adopt.
Madsen, go ahead if you wanted to add to that.
Thank you. Yeah, something that I did want to add is that we have spoken quite a bit about the benefit of using tier or canopy size to identify a small business. Also, businesses can have multiple, say, tier 1 operations operating in town. So while that is beneficial, if they have, 10 tier 1 locations around town, at a certain point, they stop being a small business. And I think that's why we're also trying to capture what is local as well. And so, yeah, there are just a lot of different confounds, I guess, that I also would like to add in there that I've thought of as well. And I think that Cassie answered that the city and the county are operating with different requirements. And so whatever we pass within the city will only apply to the city. And people are the ones that have voiced their concern about this regulation and are leaving the county entirely, are leaving because of both sets of requirements, not necessarily just one or the other.
Sandra?
Thanks. So according to census.gov, a small business is 100 to 1,500 employees. And I'd be happy to use that definition for a small business size in this scenario. So that's just some thoughts that I have.
Thanks. I've got Gwen and then Mike.
Great, thanks. Going back to the carbon filter and the air filtration, and I know you were looking for guidance on intent with that. I imagine there are, as was brought up, some OSHA or some standards in terms of indoor air quality that goes to health. And we certainly have some regulations here in Montana. I guess what I was thinking, However, I do think it's important that we pay attention to air that's being filtrated from the grow operation out into the community. I feel like we did have some comments last fall when we were setting up the zoning about odor for people in neighborhoods where they were smelling the odor. And I was just thinking back, we live in a valley, we get an inversion here, and there are days in the winter when the air does not move. And back when Garden City Compost was eco compost, and frankly, it wasn't getting quite the attention it needed, and there was a lot of odor coming from that, and I would smell it at my house, which is clear on the other side of the city. So I'm thinking filtration that addresses air that is expelled outside of the grow operation. I trust you guys to do a little bit more looking into that, but I think we should be paying attention to it if you're looking for guidance on that topic.
I guess I have a follow-up along those lines about whether or not there's anything just in sort of a nuisance section of Title 20 about odor, and that it is odor addressed at all through our standard zoning conditions, or is it something that would need to be addressed separately here?
Odor, while mentioned in zoning code, isn't really addressed in terms of like nuisance we can take action on. However, I do believe the health department's air quality district is the one who fields most of these complaints. I'd have to check in on with them again on what their kind of nuisance ordinance allows them to do. But yeah, in zoning, we really just try to zone uses so that things that produce odor aren't near sensitive areas.
Okay, thanks.
And wait, quickly expanding on that, just as Cassie said, odor's not addressed in Title 20, but our indoor smoking ordinance at all will be in Title 8, which is not covered right now.
Okay, thanks for adding that, Manson. Mike, and then Amber.
Yeah, just general question for staff. Do we have examples from other zoning or other titles that has a similar exception for small business or local? Any comparisons at all? It makes me nervous when we're going to start defining this. So just curious.
Not that I'm aware of. Zoning code differentiates manufacturing sometimes by square footage and allows smaller manufacturing operations in less intense zoning districts. Outside of that, I'm not aware of any. This is just something that we are seeing other states and jurisdictions doing. So we thought we could provide the option to follow suit.
I think that makes sense. Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead.
Given that, do we have a legal opinion that we could put different treatment for local versus not local into our regs?
I'm not aware of any. That's something we can follow up on, unless Jim Nugent has a comment at this time. Not, I'll write that down and follow up, and I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Amber, and then Sandra.
Yeah, so I can't remember who brought up the multiple locations, and yeah, I think I share Mike's concern about us defining what a small business is, and that's I understand why you want direction on that, because I think it's very complicated. So I just want to put it out there that we set rules for certain reasons, and there are always going to be people that try to get around those rules. So I think multiple locations is something that we should have in mind, and that may push them from being a small business, and however we define it, into multiple or into a larger business. So I don't have I guess I don't have any great advice on that, other than I feel like that's something we need to take into account. And I think Cassie had said this. What I was going to suggest is we actually, I care about the air quality and the odor. And I think that the health department, I don't know what communications you've had with them, the air quality specialist there might be a really good way to start, and what their standards are. I mean, kind of with some of the air quality standards around that might be a place to take into account how we set this metric. I can't imagine there's not something somewhere on indoor air quality, even though if OSHA is not addressing the specific cannabis operation issues.
Thanks, Amber. Stacy, I'm sorry, you've had your hand up for a while. I'm not sure if that was, I missed that, but do you?
That was my bad for not taking it down.
Okay, thanks. So Sandra, next.
Thanks. I do agree with Mike and Amber about having a definition for that. So I guess I kind of bit the bullet there. So my bad on that one. I do think that we should take serious consideration on the definition of the small business. But I do have some concerns about having special regulations for local businesses. Because I don't know, it feels like if we have special considerations for local businesses, I feel like we would essentially be putting like a tariff on out of state businesses. And that, I don't know, that just sits, that doesn't sit right with me. So that's just some food for thought.
Thanks. Cassie, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out one other idea, and that's if we're having issues figuring out what a smaller local business might be, there could just be maybe longer times to come into compliance for building or businesses that are already existing versus those that will start coming in 2023. Not saying that's a recommended path, but just throwing that out as another option.
Yeah, it does feel like the state regulations with that 2023 deadline or opportunity for new businesses did deliberately try to protect existing businesses, which might be an approach that we could take that would dovetail with that and not make it so that we had to define that on our own. So I like considering that. Those tiers of businesses as far as existing businesses and then new businesses after that point. Amber and then Mike.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say a little bit close what you said, Jordan. I like the idea of the kind of existing businesses and looking into that piece of it. I also, maybe I missed a piece here about what local businesses. I think maybe I missed part of that. So I apologize. But I do think, it's one thing to have a local business and then also have a subsidiary in another state. And I think that, or a parent company or whatever in another state. And I think that to me, the size, regardless of where they are, however, that's why I'm talking about multiple locations. Like I want to know the size of that business, not the size of their offshoot in Montana as we're considering giving them more time. So I agree. I don't think we can put a kind of a tariff on an out-of-state business, but we're only going to be regulating businesses that are doing business in our city, right? So, but I do think we need to take their size into consideration if we're going to give them more time.
Thanks, Amber. Mike?
Yeah, the Councilwoman Vasika said something that I kind of agree with, that I worry that we open up a slippery slope, kind of picking winners and losers on the local small versus large. But I do recognize that there's a big difference between a chain. I listened to a lot of the testimony on this when I was working to the legislator, and one of the big things that they talked about, that public comment up there talked about, was concerns that current operators were going to be pushed aside as the doors opened and large multi-state operators came in. So I recognize that, but it's a fine line, because we don't want to be in the business of picking winners and losers with this type of ordinance. That being said, I tend to agree with Mr. Carlino's comments from way back when this started on energy efficiency, and just looking around town, this is not an industry that we are hurting for locations at this moment. So I would tend to lean towards, if we are too strong on energy efficiency and we have to correct that a little bit, I think that that's a better correction than the other way around. Because it's illustrated by this white paper and kind of just everything else that the energy consumption from this group is significantly higher than the average. So I would tend to lean towards, if we're going to do it, let's do what we think is right. And if we have to correct it, we can do so.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was, along those lines, I was shocked by the statistic from Denver about the 45% of new electricity usage being attributed to cannabis. I thought that was just really illustrative of, the growth in the industry and also the massive amount of energy usage. So it's a really good point. I think at this point, I'll pause and we'll go to some public comment. If anyone would like to make comment, you're welcome to raise your hand and I'll recognize you. We'll come back for additional comment later in the meeting as well. Oh, and thank you, Amanda. So we have a slide on the screen now for how to provide comments. So you can use the hand raise feature within Zoom. If anyone attending or watching wants to provide comment but does not wish to do so right now, you can leave us a voicemail at 406-552-6012 or email us at council@ci.missoula.mt.us. Okay, seeing no comment at this time, we can go back to committee discussion. Question for staff, and then I'll go to Mirta. Do you want us to vote on, or do you want anything more than informal guidance? Do you want us to kind of vote on any of these topics that you listed as far as providing more formalized guidance, or what's most ideal?
We did have a motion plan just to make sure that we have permission to move forward on this track. As far as some of those outstanding issues, you could vote on that today, for instance, exempting certain businesses, or we can just sort of make a plan to include it and let you wrestle with it or weed it out down the line. We just need to know generally which way you guys are falling on certain issues.
Okay, thanks. Mirta?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, this is a pretty impressive document with lots of really good information and a good analysis of the data that exists. I think this is about energy consumption. And so when talking about small businesses versus the large ones, I think my inclination would be to be as equal as possible in terms of the regulation applying to everyone, because I think collectively, all these small businesses are going to have a huge impact in terms of energy consumption. So I think keeping that in mind is, to me, really important, that this is about energy consumption, not penalizing those who use it more or less. It's about reducing it to whatever extent possible. So that would be my opinion. I guess my question is, I think I read somewhere in the paper that you reached out to 33 or so stakeholders, heard back from 3 of them, but 7 filled out a survey. Maybe I'm getting the numbers incorrectly, but it seemed pretty low. And so just wondering what else you think could be done to ensure that as you move forward with this work, that later you're not hearing from all of those who haven't participated early on in the process, and ensuring that we are being as inclusive as possible of that perspective.
Yeah, I think we are due to reach out to them again with an update on where to find the Engage Missoula page, where they can read about this, look at the white paper, and leave comment. We did not have additional stakeholder meetings planned, but we could host one if you guys advise we should do that. And then, of course, taking comment by phone and email per usual as well.
And just quick follow-up, Jordan.
Yeah, go ahead, Mirta.
So is Engage Missoula, would you say that that's the main tool that was used?
That was posted after. We reached out by email and phone primarily to businesses. The state keeps a list of all the licensed businesses, cannabis businesses in Missoula. So we used that list to reach out either by email or phone number when email wasn't available. We just didn't get a lot of people attending. We sent the survey to that same group. Between the white paper and now we got 2 more survey responses. So we're at 9 of about 50. And of those 50 businesses too, those are just ones that have cannabis related licenses. It's possible a lot of them are just dispensary only and may not have a lot of interest in these regulations.
See.
But Engage Missoula is the primary place for information from this point moving forward.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I don't see any other panelists with hands up. I do have a public comment. C Powers, you should be able to unmute, and if you wouldn't mind giving us your name for the record. And okay, yeah, you should be able to.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. This is Colleen Powers, and I just want to state for the record that Cassie and her team have done their best to reach out to businesses, cannabis businesses, and they all have the same access that we have, who have actually participated in the things that they put, whether it's the survey or the stakeholder meetings or any of those things. So Cassie and team, great job in doing that. And I think that those stakeholders, if they want to be heard, they should participate.
Thanks, Colleen. I appreciate your participation in the process, and thanks for the comment. Mike?
Well, I would put the motion on the floor as presented.
Okay, thanks. That motion is in order. And so we've had good discussion on the motion. And I think I'll add a couple of my thoughts. I really appreciate the work that's gone into this. I appreciate the stakeholder outreach, and I think that the process that you've run is thorough, and it's a good one, and so I'm grateful for that. On the businesses, I personally really, the business size and local businesses, I appreciate a lot of the comments around not wanting to kind of create a new definition for what a business is or what a local business is. I do feel like there's probably some kind of built-in things within. I mean, I know within Title 20 we had different tiers of size of operation, and so maybe there's a nexus between a size of grow operation or something that's defined elsewhere and what's a small business. I don't feel qualified to make that determination right now, but I do feel like maybe there's some data there that might be helpful. I also would be really interested if there's anything within state law as far as the existing businesses versus new businesses that we've already mentioned with that 2023 deadline, that July 2023. I keep saying deadline, but that's not really the right term. But that opportunity for new businesses at that time. I do really like the idea of phasing for small or local businesses, but and I also do appreciate trying to provide opportunities that level the playing field for small businesses that might otherwise struggle to meet the requirements of the regulations. But I appreciate that it's really difficult to determine what that is and to regulate that. So I guess I defer to staff expertise on the greenhouse question. I think that the work that's being done in, I believe, Vermont and California sounds interesting, and I don't know if it's something that that is maybe very relevant in our climate. If I don't know if that's, I guess I would appreciate some additional information on that and would encourage you to, I mean, to explore that further. I don't have a strong opinion on the filter question. I personally think that the biggest issue with filtration and air quality is primarily the nuisance question to adjacent users. So that's where I would feel like if we had kind of the minimal amount of regulation to prevent nuisance odors, that would be my preference. And that's kind of where I'm at. There's another thing on here, zoning implications, that I don't fully understand what feedback. So maybe, Cassie, maybe you could cover that again on that last slide with what feedback you were looking for as far as zoning.
Yeah. That was more just included since we had heard so much about that coming out of the last Title 20 amendments, that some businesses were wondering if we were ever going to revisit that. So I did want to list staff's current stance on that, and leave it open for discussion just in case anyone on city council had heard those comments and had an idea about it, if they felt differently than we did. But more throwing it out there, especially at public meetings, because I know people are attending and looking for that information.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Sandra?
Thanks. I have a question, and depending on the answer, I might have a comment. And with the recommended motion, it says that we are, let's see here, we're directing staff to move forward with this, but then we're also setting a public hearing. So are we doing both, or just the public hearing, or I guess I'm a little bit confused about the motion.
It would be both. The motion is whether staff should move forward with what's planned in the white paper, those recommendations. Of course, we will incorporate the feedback we heard today, and then setting the public hearing so that it's on the schedule, and when you'll see us again.
Okay, may I have a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm all in support of having the public hearing for this. I don't know. I'm really uncomfortable with having this much government regulation on this business industry. So I don't think I'm going to be in support of this today. Although I am in support of having the public hearing. So because of that, I think I'm going to vote no. But thank you all for all of your time and effort with this. I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I guess on the public hearing question, the way I'm interpreting it is that we're setting a public hearing, and that we would have a public hearing draft that would, so it's kind of a package deal to write the code and then schedule the public hearing. So that's my interpretation of that. Okay, I don't see any other council comment. I'm going to go back to public comment again, and just a general comment on the motion. And so Colleen, you can go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself. I'm sorry, I may have inadvertently muted you again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to make a comment as a follow-up to what Cassie said about the Title 20 changes and zoning, and the Title 5. If changes are proposed and implemented, some of the things with regards to Title 20 and canopy size, with regards to certain locations in town. And some of the things that we've talked about with Cassie and her team, and the mayor as well, is with regards to carbon footprint. And there are some of us who are going to be doing vertical farming, and we are very much in tune to all of those things that you guys are talking about that are so important to you are important to us as well, with regards to sustainability, and just the resources being used, whether it's energy or water, or I mean, all of those types of things that are used in our business. And so what we are looking at and hopefully getting some guidance, and just want to throw out there that if we are a business who actually reduces that carbon footprint and does vertical farming, to allow within those certain zones where we have been limited with our canopy space, to increase that canopy space if in fact we are implementing all of these things and in improving and mitigating our carbon footprint and the sustainability of our business. So just something to kind of think about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for that suggestion. Anyone else from the public wish to provide any comment at this time? Okay, seeing none. Daniel, did you want to add something?
I was just curious if we could get a little bit more clarification on what Colleen was just saying about the canopy space.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we went through the Title 20 amendment process last fall, we updated our definitions to incorporate the new state definitions, which means we tied different sizes of cultivation operation to our different tiers of manufacturing. So smaller tiers of canopy area, tier 1, which is 1,000 square feet or less, are allowed in a lower intensity zoning district. And as you get bigger, you're allowed in higher intensity zoning districts, but not lower. So for instance, over 2,500 square feet of canopy area can only be in industrial zoning districts, whereas the smaller ones can be in commercial and some business districts, which also allow residential. A lot of this, the way we zoned it was in part due to urban form and the idea that as these operations get bigger, they start to look more industrial in terms of urban form, and less like some of the smaller commercial suites you might see downtown in a C district or along our main commercial corridors. A lot of those also have design excellence with glazing requirements, other facade requirements to break it up, which you may not find on a large industrial cultivation building. Colleen is saying that with LED lighting, vertical farming becomes more possible, where you could take your total canopy area and then stack it instead of having it take up so much floor area. So they're kind of wondering if LED lighting pushing toward that ability for vertical farming might reduce the impact of having these really large floor areas in businesses throughout commercial areas. And the possibility to go back and allow higher tiers that maybe do vertical farming in these lower intensity districts, in addition to mitigating odor through filtration.
Yeah, and generally, I guess I'd express that I appreciate the concept of incentives for, well, I guess I appreciate what Colleen has offered as a suggestion, and I just wanted to express that I like that concept of incentives, kind of like we do in other areas. We have incentives for having we have incentives around parking. We have incentives around other areas in zoning code, and that feels like an appropriate industry-specific incentive to consider here. So.
Yeah, and to add to that too, that would be something we'd need to list, go back in and amend Title 20 to list. So that could be a separate project after this if City Council were to vote to direct us to do something like that. Okay.
Well, I guess I'd just make the comment that I appreciate that, and maybe if we could get a little bit of additional information on that process, that would be helpful. So we've got the motion on the floor. We can take a vote on that in a moment, but has the discussion today provided staff with enough guidance, and this plus the discussion plus the vote, the direction to move forward? Should that pass? Is that enough guidance, or do you have any additional specific questions for us?
I think this has been a pretty robust conversation around the issues that we had. We're particularly interested in feedback from LUP and City Council. So at this time, I do not have any further questions or require any further insights from LUP.
Okay. Well, seeing no additional hands up in the committee or the attendees, I think we can have a roll call vote on the motion.
Anderson,
Yes.
Becerra,
Yes.
Carlino,
Yes.
Contos,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Nugent,
Yes.
Savage,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Basika.
No.
Okay, I have 10 yeses, 1 no, 0 abstains, 1 absent.
Okay, that motion passes, and since that's primarily a motion to set a public hearing, I guess Sandra, I'd ask if it's okay if we put that in the consent.
Oh, please do.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. That'll go on our consent agenda, and we will look forward to having this back sometime closer to April 4th. Anything else before we close out for the day here? Okay, seeing no additional, oh, I'm sorry, Stacy?
I just wanted to thank staff for all the work that they have done on this. Both, I mean, we are, putting this together, and they've done so much work on the ordinance and the white paper and this on top of all the other demands they have on their time. So I want to recognize that and say I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, and you're helping us craft this in a really thoughtful, educated, data-driven way.
Yeah, thanks for that. I completely agree. Okay, thanks everyone.